to our class today. Today I'm going to talk about the origin of the doctrine of eternal torment and suffering in fire. I want to talk about the origin of it. And in today's lesson, I want to show you where the origin of the eternal punishment in fire came from. And one of the foundational beliefs about the doctrine of eternal torment in fire, one of the foundational beliefs about the doctrine of the eternal punishment in fire came from what we call the doctrine of the eternal soul. The doctrine of the eternal soul. And that's what we're going to discuss today in this lesson, the doctrine of the eternal soul. And we're going to show you how the doctrine of the eternal soul was the main feature of philosophy that brought in the doctrine of hell. And the main feature of the doctrine of hell was the doctrine of eternal punishment, but the eternal soul. I have two cameras going here, and I want to try to make sure my other camera is right on course with us. So it was the doctrine of the eternal punishment in fire that was the doctrine of the eternal soul, which was the main point of the foundation of the doctrine of hell. The doctrine of hell, it did not start being called hell. It started by being the doctrine of endless torture or punishment in the afterlife. And that doctrine started with Plato, who lived around the 227 to 347 years before Christ. Probably 427 years to 347 years before Christ. That was the time of Plato. And it was Plato who had taught the doctrine of the eternal soul. When we say the eternal soul, we're talking about the fact that the soul lives forever, and that the soul is the man, and that the soul can never die. And so from the idea of the soul never dying, that influence of Plato that was in the world before Christ lived. But one thing we have to note here is that Plato never heard the gospel before. Plato was trying to guess at figuring out the gospel before the times of Christ. And so Plato, in his teachings on the eternal soul, the doctrine of the eternal soul, taught that the soul lived forever. So, and that was the time, that was the teachings of the world in Plato's time. The soul lived forever. Now, with that, it came that there was that idea, which was in Greek philosophy, was spread all over the world, and it was in the minds of people before the times of Christ. Was back in the times when the Greeks were philosophizing, and at the Parthenons, and they were giving their opinions about different things, about what made the world what it is, how it's made up, and all of those things. What happens to man, the anthropology of man. Plato and the philosophers were guessing at that. And that was in a time when the world was greatly influenced by philosophy. They did not have the gospel then. So, this idea, so everyone thought of Plato almost as the Apostle Paul. He was like the apostle to philosophy and everything that there was that they had thoughts about. So later on, after Christ, after Jesus Christ, and after the gospel was preached, later on in somewhere around about the end of the 2nd century, there was a man by the name of Athenagoras who also was a Platonic. In other words, he believed in Plato. And him believing in Plato, he believed in the immortal soul idea. And him believing in the immortal soul idea, believed that the soul could never die. So he tried his best to collaborate the teachings of Plato with those of the apostles and of Jesus. And so in his teachings of Plato and the teachings of the church, he thought that Plato's teaching of the immortal soul, also Plato taught that people burned in fire, in torment, in the afterlife. And immediately after life, those that were not worthy would end up going to burn in fire in the afterlife. He didn't get this from the Bible. But it was in the back of the minds of everybody. So Athenagoras, he came up with the idea that he tried to attach this idea to the idea of God and the church and the people in the gospel to say that, yes, what Plato said had to be true, and they burned in fire, so this must be the fire that God created and that God had for men to go to a torment and suffering in the afterlife. So, in that, he taught that Plato's theory of death and of the eternal soul must have been true, and all souls that that are sin, that are wicked, are going to burn in fire in the afterlife. And so that was how the concept of burning in fire in the afterlife came into Christianity. It was not in Christianity in the days of the apostles. In the days of the apostles taught that souls would die. They taught the doctrine of what we call annihilation and destruction, found in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 10 down to verse 13, found in Revelation chapter 20, verse 10 down to 15, found in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 24, down through verse 42. So in all of these, the apostles taught the doctrine of annihilation, the destruction of the wicked. The wicked shall be dissolved. They shall be destroyed. All right? So, I'm going to back up here a little bit in the lesson and let you know, give you my goal points. My goal points are that I want to show you that the doctrine of eternal punishment in fire started with the doctrine of the eternal soul, which was taught by Plato. Number one, I will show that the eternal soul idea is the premises for the eternal punishment idea. In other words, the eternal soul idea is the premise for the doctrine of hell. Eventually, he developed into the doctrine of hell. The eternal punishment idea was from Plato, not from the apostles. Plato was an unsaved man who never heard the gospel, who was pretty much guessing at things, but they who read him were not saying they were guessing. They who read him believed that he was, that was gospel truth to them. Because they read into Jesus Christ, and when Jesus Christ taught them about God and heaven, and so then they came up with the idea that heaven must be, hell must be the alternative to heaven. And so it was then when they grouped together the idea of heaven and hell. So point two, that's Plato. The eternal soul idea came from Plato, which was the root of the eternal punishment idea of souls being punished eternally. The Bible teaches that all souls are mine, the Lord says, but the soul is sinned, it shall surely die. It talks about the day thou eat thereof, and thou shalt surely die. So the Bible talks about the death of the soul, death being the major enemy of God and the major fear of man. But Plato said that it's not death, the soul is eternal. And so the doctrine of the eternal soul is really against apostolic doctrine, because we teach that the souls, the apostles taught, that souls can die and perish. The apostles taught annihilation and the perishment and the dissolving of the soul and anything connected to the fall. But those who were Platonic in their thinking taught that the soul was eternal. This is the root doctrine to the doctrine of hell, is the eternal soul concept. All right, that's the root doctrine. Okay, later, Tertullian, in about 240, he connected the endless soul idea to the idea of torment in the afterlife for the unsaved, with God being the administrator of the punishment. So Tertullian was a Christian and he was a theologian, but he was also drenched in what we call Greek philosophy. Greek philosophy, which was influenced by Plato. So he was Platonic and Christian. So one thing that I would say to all theologians and all pastors, you must understand that the doctrine of the eternal soul and the doctrine of eternal punishment and fire is Greek. It is a Greek mythical idea that was mixed into Christian thinking, not from the apostles. So it is a mixture of Greek mythology and Christian thinking, but it is not from the apostles. And that's something that all of us who study the Bible, and those of you in seminary or wherever you're studying who really want to know the truth, this is a point you really have to know and have to study. If you went to a Bible college and you never were exposed to the origins of the doctrine of hell, because that university or that college was pretty much traditionalist, traditionalists that used the teachings of hell without giving you the origins of the doctrine of hell, that's the problem. A lot of us are preaching it. We don't know really where it came from. We never did this study. We never really sought the true roots of this particular teaching in the world. And a lot of us are afraid because we think that our whole foundation is going to fall apart if we know something about the truth. Well, let me tell you this. Your foundation is not going to fall apart if you know these things. It's not. Because if your foundation falls apart, if you know these things, then your foundation is not solid. But I found in study that our foundation in the apostolic doctrine, our foundation in the Christian tradition is a sound foundation that finding out that lies and things that were told to us and pulling those lies out is not going to tear our faith apart. It's not going to tear it down. And I know a lot of pastors and Bible students get nervous because if you talk about something like this, they think that, it's going to destroy our faith, or it's going to, it's from the devil, it's heretics. It's not heretics. This is not heretics. This is historical fact and truth. And if you would just take a little time to do a little study yourself, you'll find out that what I'm teaching, what I'm sharing is true. All right? Okay, number 5. It was not the teachings of the apostles. The idea of the immortal soul and the eternal burning in fire. This did not come from the apostles. And then also, later on in history, when these two ideas were tied together, and they would begin to be taught by men like Tertullian, that was a couple of hundred years after the apostles were gone. And I hate to tell you this, but I hate to be the one to tell you, but I'm going to tell you the truth. The apostles knew nothing about this. The apostles knew nothing about this. This was something that came in from philosophy and from Greek mythology and brought into Christianity and tied into Christian doctrine via what we call theology. Understand theology. Theology is what men say the Bible means, not necessarily the Bible truth. The history of hell doctrine in light of the apostolic doctrine of annihilation. The concept of a soul within us that cannot die first became a Christian doctrine at the end of the 2nd century A.D. Hell had been taught in Greek philosophy long before the times of Jesus Christ, as I just told you, with Plato. Plato lived 427 to 347 BC, as the important leader in the teaching. So the doctrine of hell its origins is Platonic. It comes from Plato. The eternal soul taught by Plato in 427 was under philosophy. It was under philosophy. When the world was under philosophy of Plato. Everlasting soul equals everlasting existence. Everlasting existence and everlasting place of torment or glory. It could only be the result. So the everlasting place of torment and punishment, Plato's idea, was the place for those souls that lived forever, and that those souls that lived forever that were designated to everlasting punishment. So they went to everlasting punishment in fire. At the end of the 2nd century, philosophy and Christian thought began to share ideas. I just told you about that. Achenaris, the one who brought in the idea of the soul, the eternal soul idea, and he brought it into Christianity and tied it into the Christian thought. It wasn't originally Christian thought, but here in what we call the philosophy, theology is a mixture of philosophy and Christian teaching. And so here, philosophy is mixed. For those of you who follow me, the philosophy of the eternal soul, Plato's philosophy of the eternal soul, Plato's philosophy of burning in fire in the afterlife, mixed together makes the concept of eternal torment in fire. It makes the concept of eternal torment in fire, burning and suffering as a punishment in the afterlife. Clearly at this point, it's from Plato, it's from philosophy. This point right here in history, in maybe say 240, around that time. It is from philosophy, not from the apostles. It's based upon what the Egyptians said happened in the afterlife, not what the apostles said, neither what Jesus said. How did those words, well, put it like this, back then, the word hell wasn't even in the world. The word hell came about in about AD 726. That was way after the time of the apostles, way after the time of Athenagoras, way after the time of Philo, way after the time of Plato, way after the time of Augustine, way after those times. This concept of endless torture and fire was a concept. It wasn't called hell then. It was given hell, the word name hell, about, I say maybe 950 years after Plato's time. Some 500 years after Tertullian's time, and some maybe 800 years after Athenagoras' time, some 200-something years after Augustine's time. So the word hell, it was not in the original text of the Bible. The word was developed later to be put into the text of the Bible, and so that we can see the concept that Plato taught in those scriptures. They kind of put it in there sort of like this. They said, here it is. Here it is. This must be it. The birth of fire brimstone. That must be it. Let's see, the rich man Lazarus, he's in a flame. They put the word hell in there. I'm tormented in this flame. Put the word, he looked up in Hades, he lifted up his eyes. In hell, he lifted up his eyes. They put the words in there, in those passages, to try to make those passages teach Plato's hell idea. Well, it wasn't called hell. Eternal soul suffering in torment idea. All right? All right, now, okay. So, I told you about Athenagoras who brought it in. The early church fathers did not teach the modern idea of endless torment, nor did they teach the eternal soul doctrine of Plato, which was taught by Athenagoras, I guess in the West, and Philo to the Jews. The Jews didn't have that concept before Philo brought it and shared the eternal soul idea with them. The early church fathers did not believe in that. When the early church fathers, these men who were close to the apostles, they did not teach hell. They did not teach the eternal soul idea, the immortal soul idea. They did not teach the burning in fire in the afterlife. They taught that the wicked would be annihilated and they would be done away with, but they didn't teach all those concepts about eternal burning in fire. That was not taught by them. And I say to anybody who's watching me, do not judge me on this. You go and study for yourself. Don't react to me and say that I'm teaching heresy. I've got facts here. I've got all my stuff here. I have almost 50 years of apostolic faith theology. And I have a seminary knowledge and experience, and I have research, and I am a PhD, and I am the professor of systematic theology and eschatology at the Institute. And I have studied, and I am not teaching you false doctrine. I'm giving you documented information. And if you will, and if you be wise, you will go, before you call me a heretic, you should research this, because if you call me a heretic, and then your people will follow you, just do a little research. It won't take about a couple of days to find this out. And then they'll come to you and say, you're not a reliable person to tell us that someone was a heretic who was actually giving us truth. So before you call me a heretic, make sure you take our time to study and get your stuff together, then come to me, because I think I've studied just about as much as anybody on the topic, and I've got yet more to go. But what I see, I'm not playing games with you. It's not heretics. It's information. Okay, so back to the early church fathers: Clement, Ignatius, Hermes, Plato. They taught that the wicked will be destroyed by fire, annihilated. They taught the same thing as the apostles taught in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 10 through 13, where Peter talks about they shall be dissolved and destroyed. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 24 through 31. Revelation chapter 20, verse 9 through 15, when it talks about the lake that burns with fire and brimstone. They, the wicked, are annihilated and done away with. All right? But the pagan Platonic teacher, Tertullian, in about 240 AD, tied the idea of the eternal soul to the idea of Greek endless torment in fire together, and created the idea of the endless punishment in the afterlife, burning in fire, which later became known as hell. By the time 726 AD, the word hell was made up to describe it. All right? So this is where you're getting that from, pastors. This is where it comes from. You can do your own research, but this is where it comes from. It did not come from the apostles. The concept of endless torture is from Plato before Christ, but the Christian description of it was named that 953 years later, after Plato. It was then in 240 AD that endless torment was, endless torment was equal to and or parallel to the idea of heaven. This idea of is heaven or hell, that's based upon your Johnny-come-lately theologies you've been taught by your local pastors and your our fathers in the gospel, in the latter days of their lives, who received this from these places. Even though a lot of our fathers in the gospel didn't know this is where it came from. They didn't know it. I don't even know of one of our fathers in the gospel who actually really did a thorough study of all of the concepts of hell that we were preaching. They pretty much went off what they call allegorical interpretations. In other words, what other people said and what the scripture looked like it was saying. But none of us really went into in-depth. And I challenge any pastor to go into in-depth, whatever scriptures you're using to teach hell, to see what those scriptures are really saying that. Because those words were actually injected in those passages, like in 1611 by the translators of the King James Version, who went into the Bible with it already in their minds. They didn't let the Bible talk to them. They plugged those words in there, where it never was in the Bible. They plugged that in there based upon what they received from Plato and was handed down to them from Plato through Augustine and these other guys And they plug those words in there. Those words are not in the original text. And instead of you all looking at me like I'm strange, I should be looking at you like you're strange. Because I know good well those words are not there. And I'm surprised that some of us, and I really shouldn't be that surprised because it has been our tradition. I'm surprised, I'm disappointed at those who would challenge me and call me a heretic. I'm not surprised at those who don't know it, who never read this and never knew this. I'm not really surprised because that was all of us. I taught the hell for 50 years. I never knew all of this. I didn't know it. My father taught it. My grandparents, my father's in the gospel, they taught it. And I'm not surprised at that because it was given to us. We inherited it. We inherited it from the cradles. But what I'm disappointed in is that for me to do my job as an apologist, to explain it to the body of Christ, and people jump on me who have done no research and who are afraid that maybe their people will find this out or what it is. Whatever it is you're afraid of, I'm not the one to blame for us not knowing this. I'm sharing it. And so it'd be best for us to all come together and study together and work on this than for you to attack me because you don't know. All right? All right, okay, so the idea of heaven and hell, even when we go to funerals and preach, you're going to that place afterwards, that all came from Tertullian and those who put that in Christian religion, that heaven is equal or the equal opposite to hell. Well, that wasn't what the apostles taught. There's nothing to be compared to heaven. There's nothing be compared to the glory that shall be in heaven. All right, nothing. And so, but Tertullian and Plato and all these guys who were involved in this, they made this stuff up, shoved it down our throats, and we, without investigation, preached it for years. The soul has to spend eternity either in torment or in glory. That's not true. The souls that are saved will go to glory, but the souls that are lost, according to the apostles in the scripture I gave you, they'll be annihilated and done away with. They'll be annihilated, but according to Plato, they're going to still be around. We're not supposed to believe Plato, we're supposed to believe the apostles. This is where the unapostolic coupling was formed, coupling of heaven and hell, as if they're both in the same category, and put into Western theology and taught. In here, in the philosophy of man, where torment is an option to glory. Torment is a default of not going to glory. So in other words, torment is there by default. Who put that there? I tell you who put that there. These false men who don't know the gospel. God never intended for torment to be a default for glory. Glory is not contingent upon people not going to torment or escaping torment and get to glory. No, heaven is an assurity. It is an assurity for the believers. It's eternal. And it's not to be compared to a man-made hell idea. Okay? It says here, this is where the torment and endless suffering is given equal weight to eternal glory, which was never so in the apostles' teachings. Nothing is to be compared to the glory of heaven. All right? Now, let me go back over it. Okay, I'm trying to go here and explain to you what point am I making? The point I'm making is that the doctrine of hell came from the doctrine of Plato's philosophy of the eternal soul and of the burning fires in the afterlife. It was brought into Christian thinking by Anaxagoras and by Tertullian. And it was introduced and taught by Philo to the Jews. And they picked up on it. It did not come from the apostles. It did not come from God. But it came from these unsaved men. And so, and we also taught that the early church fathers didn't teach the eternal soul. The apostles did not teach the eternal souls. It was not the teachings of the early church. Now, what I want to do now is I want to give you some, just give you a little bit of history, then we're going to review what we've already talked about. I'll give you a little bit of history. Then we'll go into the review. Somebody's just coming in, so don't pay attention to what you hear in the background. But anyway, the review of the lesson. Okay, let me just give you a couple of people. The idea of the eternal soul and the idea of endless fire, burning in endless fire, was not the original teaching of the church, not the teaching of the apostles, not the teaching of the early church fathers. All right? Also, there were several groups that came along. The Wardensies, they didn't believe in that. The Catharians, they didn't believe that. The Hushites didn't believe it. John Wycliffe, he didn't believe in that. Martin Luther didn't believe in that. And not only that, but Oregon, the whole Eastern religions from the time of maybe about the first and the second century on up to Augustine did not believe in the doctrine of hell and did not believe in the eternal soul. Now, let me say this to you, that the doctrine of the eternal soul was in one school of thought. There were 6 schools, major schools of thought in that time period from I guess maybe about the first and second century all the way up to the 5th century. 6 schools. Now, only one of them taught the doctrine of eternal punishment, and that was the school that was sponsored by St. Augustine. All right. So what I'm trying to say to you is that if you came from the East and you were in the year say 150 to 427, if you were teaching the doctrine of hell as the eternal soul, the majority, even though it was Platonic, the majority of Christians didn't believe that. They didn't teach it. Oregon, who was the seat of systematic theology from the East, he didn't believe that, and he influenced almost the whole world, and they didn't believe it. You are Johnny come lately. If you were apostolic before Augustine, you didn't believe it. We are what we call post-Augustinian believers of it. But anyway, so I'm just going to give you some of the names and the people who didn't believe in that. In our modern times, those of you who go to Bible college, you all know F.F. Bruce. F.F. Bruce alluded to that he didn't believe in that. John Stott, and then Clark H. Plymouth from Oxford, he didn't believe in that. C.S. Lewis believed it had a more annihilationist perspective. And those of you who know F.F. Bruce, the great scholar, and a lot of you studied under him and read his books, he was more inclined to an annihilation perspective. And John Wyndham, also a major scholar. And the list goes on to the major scholars who did not believe and did not take this eternal soul concept to be a valid Christian doctrine. John Stott and John Wyndham and Michael Green, Philip Hughes and Roger Foster, Richard Buckham, Basil Atkinson and Howard Marshall, Clark Pennock and Edward Flood, of course, Greg Boyd, Harold Camping, Homer Haley. See, some of these are Bible scholars who wrote some of the books you all use, Haley Bible Commentary, and Erling Ellis, and White, and the list goes on and on and on and on for the major scholars who understand this, and major historians. There's a number of them who know that where this doctrine came from, and they know about the eternal soul idea. Major theologians, and not just because they're major theologians, but because we can prove this in the Bible that this is where this came from. But anyway, so I need to take you to Augustine now, And I need to discuss with you Augustine. And I need to show you that St. Augustine was the one who actually, who was the major theologian after Origen. So Origen from the east, Augustine from the west. So Augustine was the man who actually got it to be the doctrine of eternal punishment, to be, it wasn't called hell then, but to be the major doctrine of the Western Church. It was Catholicism, because Catholicism married Greek mythology and paganism. And in the marriage of Greek mythology and paganism, the idea of endless suffering and torment in fire was one of the babies that was sown into Catholicism via Plato being the daddy. He sowed that seed into Catholicism, and then the doctrine of hell was born out of the sexual relationship between the pagan ideas of the Greeks and Plato with the ideas of Christianity about the eternal torment for Christians and unbelievers. And so when the baby was born, it came out the doctrine of endless torment in fire, and it was handed all throughout Western Christianity. Later on, it was named hell in about 726, and then in about 1611 or somewhere around there, maybe the 1400s, or maybe the actual manuscripts of the Bible were taken, and the word hell was placed in there based upon what Plato said and what Augustine said, not based upon what the apostles said, not based upon what Origen said, not based upon what Clement said, not based upon what Ignatius said, not based upon what Archimedes said, but based upon Augustine, who was a half pagan and a half Pope Christian. Augustine was a pagan Gnostic. If you study his background, you got the doctrine of hell from a pagan Gnostic, and from somebody like Tertullian, who helped form it, who was a polytheist. He believed in more than one God. He believed in trinities and all that kind of stuff. But Augustine also he believed in pagan gods. These men, if you check their backgrounds, you will find out how it is that they came up with such a damnable doctrine and put a curse on the church like that. So this is where these things come from. They did not come from the apostles. They're not apostolic doctrine, and they're not biblical. Many of the texts in the Bible where they put the word hell, the word death was there because the apostles taught, and it was written in the Bible that death is the main enemy of God. It is the thing that has to be dealt with, not hell. Death is. That's the reason why Paul said, and the last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. And so, but the apostles taught the annihilation. Like with Revelation, the Revelation, I think it's 10 or 13, where it says, and death and hell were cast into the lake. Well, actually, in the original text, the word hell is not there. The word Hades is there. So what does that mean? What that means is that death and dying are going to be done away with. Death, dying, and the hold of death. The Hades is the hold of death. And what these people push in hell there, trying to do is take that glory off the gospel. What the gospel is saying there is that the death and the very hold of death will be gone. That's what Hades is. Hades is the grave, the hold of death. But both of them are going to be thrown into the lake. The lake that burns with fire and brimstone is the symbol of the annihilation, of the getting rid of everything, all the evil things that are in the world. It's the annihilation. That's what the lake that burns with fire and brimstone is. And so the word hell was not in the original text. And I guess when we get into some other lessons, we'll be able to see how that word was placed in the Bible and how this came from Plato, not from Paul. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll join us again sometime as we talk about the origins of the doctrine of hell. Thank you very much.